Jesus Christ is King. And I thank him for allowing this debate to take place tonight. Is it reasonable to believe that God exists? Yes. Yes, it is. I'm going to argue tonight that not only is it reasonable to believe that God exists, but that denying belief in God reduces one's worldview to absurdity. Well, why is it reasonable to believe that God exists? Quite simply, because it's true that he exists. Here's my argument. Premise 1. It's reasonable to believe that which is true. Premise 2. It's true that God exists. Conclusion. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe that God exists. Now, in order for an argument to be sound, it must not only be valid in form, but the premises must be true. Now, I highly doubt that Matt is going to argue against the validity of the form of the argument or the truth of the first premise. It's reasonable to believe that which is true. I mean, that's the very definition of reason. The intellectual ability to apprehend the truth. See, I suspect that the disagreement is going to come from the second premise. Matt is going to want me to show that it's true that God exists. I mean, I watched a lot of video with Matt recently, and truth is very important to him.
I care about what's actually true. My only concern is, or my primary concern is whether or not a belief's true. I actually give a shit about whether or not something's true. Truth is the thing that I value most.
Matt values truth so much that he even put on a t-shirt. He wants to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. Well, so do I. And guess what? I say it's true that God exists. Therefore, it is true that God exists. My argument is sound and the debate is over. How does that work for you, Matt?
Saying something doesn't make it true.
Oh. Saying something doesn't make it true. Well, how's this? It's true for me that God exists. Therefore, it's true that God exists.
I'm talking about the idea that something could be true because it's true for you. That's the thing that I'm actually rejecting.
Just because it's true for me doesn't mean it's true. Oh well. I strongly feel it's true that God exists, therefore God exists.
Just because you feel it strongly doesn't mean that it's true.
Not feelings either. Well, lots of people believe that God exists, and they're very sincere, and it's really looked down upon to not believe that God exists. So that must make it true. Right?
The truth is not impacted in any way by the number of people that believe the claim, or the sincerity of their belief, or how much it's looked down upon.
Oh man. Not because I said it, not because it's true for me, not because I feel it, not because others believe it, not because the belief is sincere, or because its denial is frowned upon. Come on. Help me out here, Matt.
When we're talking about truth, and the fact that truth has to exist independent of our knowledge of it, yes, that's true.
Oh, okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Truth exists independent of our knowledge of it. Perhaps at this point, a definition of truth would be in order. How does Matt define truth?
Truth is that which comports with reality.
Truth is that which comports with reality. Great. Wait a minute. Whose view of reality? In my view of reality, God exists. And I really, really believe that my view of reality is the right view. Does that make it true?
You can believe that naked pixies whisper in your ear and clean out your sink at night if you want to. But it has no bearing at all on the objective reality that we actually have to deal with.
Oh, okay, I get it. Objective reality. What's really real. Not just because I believe it. Truth must be that which corresponds to objective reality. Well, that makes sense, actually. Just because somebody high on drugs believes that there's snakes on the bed doesn't mean that there's actually snakes on the bed. In order to know if something's true, our internal beliefs must match what's actually true, what's actually real.
I want my internal model of reality to match the actual reality I live in as best as possible.
Of course he does. It has to match actual, objective, ultimate reality to be true. Matt cares about truth, so he must care about ultimate reality. Right?
I don't care whether this is the ultimate reality.
Wait, what? Matt doesn't care if this is the ultimate reality? Surely that was a slip of the tongue. Surely Matt must care a little bit about what's ultimately real.
Possibilities and reality. I don't care. Sorry, I just really, really, really don't care.
He really, really, really doesn't care. Now, folks, that's a problem. Truth is that which is ultimately real, and Matt doesn't care what's ultimately real. Why is that? Why doesn't Matt care what's ultimately real?
My position is that, yes, we cannot distinguish whether or not, I can't distinguish whether the reality I experience is an ultimate reality. I could be in a matrix or a brain of that, or pick any thought experiment you want.
Matt doesn't care what's ultimately real because he can't know what's ultimately real. You heard it. He could be a brain in a vat. According to Matt's worldview, he could only know that which is in his own brain. See, I'd even argue that point. But surely that would be absurd. I mean, isn't that solipsism? Solipsism. A theory in philosophy that your own existence is the only thing that is real or that can be known. Well, that's nuts, right? I mean, anybody who claims to be a solipsist deserves to be mocked, right?
And because I'm a solipsist, because I am in certain...
You're a solipsist?
...traps like most people...
Mocked, and hung up on. Good job, Matt. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, if that were the case, not only could you not know ultimate reality, you'd have no basis for trusting the reality that you think you're experiencing. I mean, you might think that you're in a room with blue walls when you're a brain in a vat in a room with orange walls. You see, I have watched a lot of Matt's videos, and he hangs up on a lot of people. Now, why would Matt hang up on the solipsist? Why would he hang up on the solipsist? I wonder.
We cannot ever solve the problem of hard solipsism, pretending that I'm claiming to be able to defeat hard solipsism. I have no solution to that.
Matt has no solution for solipsism. In fact, according to Matt's worldview, he must be a solipsist. But rather than admit it, he mocks somebody claiming solipsism. Of course, Matt would never admit to being a solipsist. Or would he?
Obviously, I'm not a solipsist, you're not a solipsist, but in some possible world...
Actually, I kind of am.
...there actually is...
Did you catch that? It's kind of soft. I enhanced the audio for you.
Obviously, I'm not a solipsist, you're not a solipsist, but in some possible world...
Actually, I kind of am.
...there actually is...
Actually, he kind of is a solipsist. Of course he is. Matt can't know anything outside his own brain. And I have to show that it's true that God exists. He can't know anything outside his own brain, and he's going to argue that it's unreasonable to believe in God? My friends, this debate isn't over. It never started. Matt's worldview isn't down for the count. It's dead. It just doesn't have the courtesy to lie down. You see, you need to be able to know what's ultimately real to know what's true. I submit that you can't know what's ultimately real without revelation from God. How do I know what's real? The same way all of you do. Revelation from the God that all of you know exists. Christians profess that truth. Professed atheists suppress it. You see, becoming a Christian is not a matter of going from unbelief to belief. It's a matter of going from suppressing the truth to professing it. No one becomes a Christian and says, well, what do you know? There is a God. You see, God doesn't send people to hell for denying what they don't know, but for their sin against the God they do know. Is it reasonable to believe that God exists? Yes. Yes, it is. Why? Because it's true that God exists, and denial of that claim reduces one's worldview to absurdity. Matt says that truth is that which comports with reality. He admits he can't know what's ultimately real. Therefore, according to his worldview, he can't know anything to be true and has zero basis for challenging my claim that it's reasonable to believe that God exists. Thank you.
So, yeah, read the Bible.
What if I'm
I'm not convinced that the Bible is offering good information.
That's a subjective opinion.
Yeah, okay, it's my subjective opinion. But if the Bible tells me, for example, that it's okay to own people as property, and the facts of reality show that this is contrary to human well-being, how do you resolve that conflict?
Is this a debate about Christianity?
This is a debate about how do we find out the answers, secular humanism or Christianity. Does Christianity condemn slavery?
Yes.
Wow, that's a new one, because the Old Testament confirms it, and Jesus specifically, rather than saying, you know what, with the Old Testament we got this wrong, now I'm here to tell you that slavery is immoral, instead Jesus says slaves obey your masters.
Maybe you're not aware of Old Covenant, New Covenant, abrogation, Hebrews chapter 8, Hebrews chapter 9, and that the doing away of many of these old things. In Christian theology in the New Testament, you find nothing about the promotion of slavery, except in the book of Philemon, and even there's the negation of it. If you do a Bible study on it, you'll see what Paul was talking about.
Where does the Bible say slavery is immoral?
I don't think it says those words.
Exactly.
And
where does the Bible say that slavery is morally permissible?
I don't think it says those words either.
Okay. Setting aside those words, where is that concept presented, that slavery is all right?
I don't think it's right there.
Really?
What do you mean by slavery?
Or Leviticus 25?
Well, what do you mean by slavery?
What do I mean, owning other people as property?
Where's that in the Bible?
Exodus 21, Leviticus 25.
Well, just quoting these things out really fast isn't the issue. You see, you got to understand something. Hold on. In Deuteronomy, it says that if you are not to, if you have an ox, someone's ox that is lost, you are to return that ox.
Slaves aren't oxes.
I know that.
I'm just saying.
The principle is that if someone's property is lost or someone else's property is there, you are to return it.
Right, but so if their slave is lost, you're supposed to return it, right? Because that's property.
If a slave comes to you or wants to escape, you do not return them. If it's property, then they should be returned. The concept of the scriptures is not that they're simple property. If you want to get into the world of property, we can, but this is an issue of slavery or the superiority of secular humanism.
I don't know how to
since your worldview does not include God as part of the equation, then since there's only two things to work with that we can even talk about, the natural world, which you said we know, and there's nothing that we can use as a method to determine the supernatural, we're left with the natural. So your worldview necessitates the working of the natural.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm working within that. The worldview of the natural has the physics, laws of chemistry, etc. Our brain works on physics, laws of chemistry, etc. How does a physical brain therefore produce proper logical inference if one chemical state loses another chemical state, and that's what our brains are?
So, like I said, there's no guarantee that any particular brain is going to actually reason correctly. And what I will say is that logic is not something that is, or the foundations of thought aren't something that are produced by a brain. They are truths that we recognize. They are the truths demonstrated by a simple Venn diagram that something is either A or not A. That's it.
You're not answering the question.
Okay, the question is, how can a brain produce logic?
How does a brain restricted to physical laws of chemistry and physics? I'm just going to use motion, matter, chemistry, physics. How does that produce proper logical inference? As you said, which I think is very interesting, is not dependent upon the human brain. I totally agree with you. Well, then that means your brain, my brain are different brains. We can't use your brain or my brain to be the standards of logical inference. We can't. We both agree. We both make mistakes. We're both not perfect in our logical thinking.
What do we point to?
We apply to something else these laws of logic. Now, the issue is the physical brain. Yeah, and they're outside of ourselves.
Correct.
The physical. Oh, there you go.
Except they don't exist as things. They are not contingent upon any individual's thought. They don't exist as a thing.
So my question is, how does the physical brain, where one chemical state relates to another chemical state or changes to one, how does it produce proper logical inference? Does it?
Can it?
Can it?
Yes. Otherwise, we wouldn't.
How would you know?
Because we can recognize it through the logic that we just talked about. So,
wait a minute. If your brain's saying that, and that's all that is of physical chemicals, you can't say that to be true. Because you don't know if your brain's saying that is right. You're just saying that.
This is the real issue here, and this is truth. What's the definition of truth according to you?
Well, look, The issue
No, if
here...
you're going to make truth and logic the foundation of it, we ought to get this out.
Truth is that which corresponds to actuality and or logic.
Okay, so we agree on what truth is. And so if truth is what corresponds to actuality and logic, then when a brain reasons, you take the output of that and see if it correlates with logic and with the facts of reality and reason.
But the problem is, if you are in a cage of physical chemical reactions,
Yes.
you cannot ascertain whether or not those conclusions properly relate to the truth.
So the assessment doesn't have to be done solely, which is why science relies on the independent affirmation. Now, you can say, and I will agree, at the end of the day, maybe all of us are wrong. And you know what? I agree. It's not impossible that we could all be wrong. But the question is, I see no way around that problem. I am stuck dealing with the reality that I deal with on its rules, under my understanding. And it seems to me that so is everybody else. The people that I interact with, they use logic and reason. We come to agreement on things. We actually point out where something is in conflict with logic. And if your answer to that is to say, hey, that's just a brain bubbling up the claim that it's in conflict, that you have committed a fallacy, and it's just Zach's brain that is bubbling up in agreement with me that you've committed a fallacy, and all these other brains, and therefore all you're doing is denying that truth is accessible at all. And you don't, your solution, you don't have a solution.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Please
But
tell
we're
us your
still,
solution.
But we're still on this.
Well,
you see,
you know.
I think you're squirming a little bit. You're trying, and I understand that. You're an
I'll
atheist,
sit-
and your worldview restricts you from being able to think through this, other than me just responding by saying your brain made you say that. You see, you're the one who says...
That's the answer of somebody who's not squirming. Your brain made you say it, your brain made you say it.
No, that's just a logical necessity of your position. If your brain is nothing more than physical chemical reactions, no matter what you say, I can respond with, your brain made you say that. There is no way to determine truth if chemical reactions lead to other chemical reactions. That doesn't mean truth. You yourself said you got to appeal to something outside of yourself,
Yes.
which means...
Brains are capable of
Which
appealing to
means-
things outside of themselves.
You're abandoning your own naturalism.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
My naturalism does not preclude the fact that Zach is there to tell me that I'm wrong. It doesn't preclude the fact that you're outside.
Exactly.
To tell me that I'm wrong.
That's fine.
That's part of naturalism.
That's fine, but that's not the issue. The issue is the laws of logic, which are not dependent upon physical brains.
Correct.
But your...
Brains are capable of
Which
appealing to
means-
things outside of themselves.
You're abandoning your own naturalism.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
My naturalism does not preclude the fact that Zach is there to tell me that I'm wrong.
Brain, here, I'll try it again.
They're not
Your
prescriptive.
brain is chemical reactions. I just said something. If it's just chemical reactions, then what I say is irrelevant. What you respond with is irrelevant. It's not an issue of truth. It's an issue of my chemical reactions are better than your chemical reactions.
No, it's not. It's about my demonstration of consistency with the logical absolutes, and the facts of reality are more reliable than yours.
That's not true. You see, I'm trying to tell you, I'll go over it again and again. Your
No, what
physical
you're doing
brain...
is you're demonstrating that you can just flat out deny something.
I'm not denying
that
the laws of logic.
You can deny something by saying that's not true.
What am I
But
denying?
as you said in your talk, something's not true just because somebody says so, and you merely saying that that's not true. If I demonstrate to you a logical fallacy in an argument, and you're in agreement that there's a fallacy there, have we gotten to the truth?
Well, the only truth we would have agreed on is that there was a logical fallacy.
But, okay, so we've agreed that there's a logical fallacy, right?
Yeah.
And we don't also agree that the foundations of reason, identity, non-contradiction, excluded-middle, are what dictate that particular fallacy?
No problem. No problem. Agreed.
Sure. So you and I are in agreement that there's a logical fallacy. And you're saying that we can't that we can't say that under my worldview.
Yes.
Okay?
No, you can. No, correct. You can say it.
I'm not going to play that little game.
Yeah. Okay. Good. You can say it, but that's not the issue. I know what you're getting at. The justification from that worldview, that's the issue.
Here's
My
the thing.
worldview, I can justify it. Your worldview, you
Okay.
can't. Let's
We'll-
go over it
we'll
again.
get to
A
whether
chemical
we'll-
state that leads to another chemical state doesn't produce proper logical inference.
We'll get to whether or not you can justify it, but here's the thing. We have two different worldviews,
Yes?
okay? And yet you just agreed that we can agree about a logical fallacy.
Of course
which
we can.
demonstrates that I can, in fact, be correct about a logical fallacy.
Of course you can.
Okay?
That's not the issue.
Okay.
The issue isn't that. Let me try it again. You have one chemical state that leads to another chemical state in the brain. This is your worldview. And yet you're going to say this interaction and this change, I'm going to oversimplify, baking soda and vinegar. That's an oversimplification, but something we can relate to. There it is, fuzz. Does that produce proper logical inference? Of course not. But if your worldview is comprised of a world of physics and chemistry and motion and matter, then that's what it reduces to. You cannot justify the laws of logic in that worldview.
Okay, no. Why are we talking about whether or not you can justify the laws of logic when I said I presuppose them? When I say I presuppose these, I'm already acknowledging
You're presupposing them.
Yes.
I got that. Let's try it again. Your worldview cannot account for them.
What difference does that make?
Let me finish.
Why would you presuppose something that you can account for? Of course it can't account for it.
I'm trying to say this. Your worldview refutes itself.
How? Because my worldview is that I presuppose this because I can't account for it.
When you have a chemical state that leads to another chemical state, it doesn't guarantee proper logical inference. Now, let me finish. Therefore, what it means is your conclusions can't be trusted as being correct.
Wrong.
And
they can be trusted for being correct.
How do you know?
Because I am
How do you know?
presupposing it. You don't. If you just
How?
keep.
How can it be?
Wow, it's perfect.
Go.
Here's the thing. We'll backtrack a second, because the police are coming to haul us away. I acknowledge that I cannot give an account for the logical absolutes. My position is also, I don't see how anyone or anybody or anything could account for the logical absolutes. The reason I wanted to ask about truth is because you have in all of your objections here an implication that there must be absolute certainty. Implication. That there must be absolute certainty, which I've already pointed out is not the case, that you can have reasonable positions, probabilistic positions, that don't require absolute certainty, which is why I was asking about the definition of truth. If I say my worldview does not account for this, I'm also willing to say I've never been presented with any explanation from any worldview that could account for this. What I hear is somebody saying, my worldview can account for it because I have an invisible friend who's perfect and can't account for these. Or, my worldview can account for this because I have something that I can't demonstrate to be true, which serves as a necessary and sufficient account of this thing. That is just an assertion. It is not a demonstration of truth. It's not a demonstration that your worldview can account for it. Saying you can account for it, don't make it so.
Hey, there goes your brain chemicals reacting again, saying stuff.
Really?
I have to make this point. This is what you're saying.
We have 2 minutes left in our conversation.
Thank your God.
I can see why you'd want that over.
No.
So you say we don't have to have...
I can see why I want it over too, because when I make an argument that actually gets to a point, you reply as if you're I'm sorry, you're not a cut above, with brain fizz again.
Okay. I've made my case. You are the ones who said we don't have to have absolute certainty. No problem with that. My position is not that. My position is that in this particular subdivision we're talking about, it's self-refuting. You cannot trust your own brain to properly represent actuality. You cannot present a rational reason without presupposing that the laws of logic, that laws of chemistry and physics can produce proper logical inference. This is a problem. It's a serious problem inside of the secular worldview. That's the position, and you're not tackling that particular position. You jump into the area where we both basically agree. Of course you can use logic. And I have an article on my website. Can atheists be ethical? Of course they can be ethical. Can they be logical? You better believe they can. The issue isn't that. In this worldview, where chemical reactions lead to other chemical reactions, you cannot demonstrate that leads to proper logical inference. And if anything, it can be demonstrated that it could lead to something that's not proper logical inference, which means you shouldn't trust a system.
Sure. Where in there did you explain how you can account for those laws of logic? Sure.
I can account for the laws of logic by presupposing that God exists. Okay, let me finish. Because the laws of logic themselves are abstractions, and they're universal and transcendent, and universal transcendent abstractions imply a universal mind.
Lose Are you feeling sorry for yourself? Well, you should be, because you are dirt. You make me sick, you big baby. Baby, want a bottle? A big dirt bottle?
Dr. Donahue will now question Mr. Hitchens for 4 minutes.
I think I know why you don't like Mother Teresa, but I think you really should be man enough to tell the audience some of your more despicable comments. So since you weren't, I'll do it for you. These are Christopher Hitchens' word. Mother Teresa, in regard to her opposition to abortion, he said, quote, "It sounds grotesque when uttered by an elderly virgin." She has also been regarded as a presumable virgin, and you've also referred to as an elderly virgins terrified of sex should not tell the rest of us how to live our sex lives. So that's really the kind of individual you are, Christopher, so don't give me the stuff about Duvalier. Now, why is she such a threat to you? All right. You see, both Christopher Hitchens and Mother Teresa had one thing in common. They both professed to have something in common with regard to the poor. They both said they were concerned about the poor. Unlike Mr. Hitchens, Mother Teresa actually did something about the poor. So she... Well, what's bothering him is that here's a woman engaged in private philanthropy, grounded in her Catholic tradition, and you, sir, you want state socialism. That is why she terrifies you, and she continues to terrify you. You want coercion, and Mother Teresa, of course, chose altruism. You know, if you're going to write a book, too, you really have to do it in a scholarly fashion. For example, this is a scholarly work. This is a book which I wrote, okay? This is a piece of trash. This is a book which you wrote. Now, why would I say that? This is the Mother Teresa book. Not because of the content. He has the freedom of speech. When you write a book, if you're going to be taken seriously, it's always helpful to have an index, okay? You don't have any index. Yours is 8.5 by 5.5, 98 pages. But more importantly, there's something called footnotes, which go at the foot of the page, or endnotes, which go at the end of the chapter. If you take a look at my book, you have 1,060 attributions. It's called evidence, Christopher, and we open up your book and we don't find any. Now that, you see, if you were one of my undergraduate students, that would have to merit an F. I'm sorry. It doesn't carry any weight. You know, the reason why you really don't like Mother Teresa, you say she takes from the rich in your book, and she gives from the poor. Well, who the hell did you expect her to take it from? The poor? I mean, what kind of a mentality is this, you know? She visits dictatorships, so does the Red Cross. And what do you have against dictatorships anyhow, sir? You have been in love with the Marxists all over Latin America. To give you an idea of where he's coming from, he was so angry at Mother Teresa because she wouldn't install an elevator in one of her buildings to rescue the homeless in the Bronx. He didn't mention that she agreed to take them up the stairs. The nuns would carry the homeless up the stairs. No, because the mind of the bureaucrat, the person who must have the state, is the mind of the person who would be against anybody who's doing anything like this. It's called voluntarism. But most amazing, in your book, you say that Calcutta needs population control. But on the page before, you actually say that secular leftist politics predominates. Didn't you quite figure out the cause and effect? In social science, it's called an independent variable and a dependent variable. Didn't you quite figure out that the reason they have so much poverty over there is precisely because of your secular leftist politics, which predominates? Where in God's name has socialism ever delivered anything but what Orwell said? Leader worship, oppression, and war. That's the legacy of what you stand for.
Thank you, Dr. Donahue.
But a fundamental one is that he dumbs down God and he soups up nothing. He continually talks as though God is some sort of upmarket figure within space and time. Now, from 450, 500 BC, where with the Greek philosophers, God is outside space and time. God is necessary, self-sufficient, uncaused, unconditioned. That's the hypothesis you've got to wrestle with. The second thing is that Krauss says nothing about the Big Bang coming out of nothing. Admittedly, he comes clean on about 6 pages from the end of his book, and I don't know whether Richard has read it that far because he gave it a foreword. What he says is what Richard is describing as nothing is a sort of a mixture of particles and perhaps a vacuum with electromagnetic forces working on it. That's what Krauss is talking about under the heading of nothing. And there's a very good review of this in the New York Times, not a pro-religious paper at all, where Krauss is absolutely denied and demolished, although especially by his supporters claiming that he says things come out of nothing. He doesn't say that.
It's a matter, you can dispute exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. And why is that funny?
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
You say faith is rational and evidence-based. I mean, if that were true, it wouldn't need to be faith, would it? I mean, if there were evidence for it, why would you need to call it faith? You'd say just evidence. And when you said that faith in relativity, in Einstein's theory of relativity, is evidence-based, that of course it is. But the evidence is all important. I mean, Einstein's predictions fit in with observed fact and with a whole body of theory, whereas we only need to use the word faith when there isn't any evidence.
I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that?
Yes,
plenty.
Yes, plenty of evidence.
Darwin made a great contribution. I remember talking with Julius Kornberg, a very distinguished biologist, and he's worked with ants for years. And he said, you know, he's managed to change them by changing the conditions. But there are a number of things that evolution doesn't explain. Darwin realized that. Darwin was a theist because he said he couldn't believe that the immense cosmos and all the beautiful things in the world came about either by chance or out of necessity. He said, I have to be ranked as a theist. Now,
that's just not true.
Excuse me,
it's plain not true.
It's on page 92 of his autobiography. Go and have a look.
You know, there's a bumper sticker that was doing the rounds in the 80s and in many parts of the U.S., which said on the back, there will, as long as there are math tests, there will always be prayer in schools. It's true. You can't ban a student from praying when he's looking at a question paper in an exam and he knows he's going to flunk it. You better believe he's going to call out to God. In fact, I don't know how many of you know the name of Richard Dawkins. Do you know the name of Richard Dawkins, that very noted atheist, belligerent atheist? I want to tell you something fascinating that happened, and this is a true story. It happened a few months ago. He was on a radio program on the BBC live, and he was dialoguing with one of the ministers of St. Paul's Cathedral. And he was, as usual, but Dawkins just very belligerent and hostile and verbose and all that he does to criticize believers. And he said, you know, Christians are basically very unintelligent people. He said, if you want to ask an average Christian even to name the Gospels, they won't know it. They don't know it.
Interesting. It tells us an awful lot. When you say, I'm telling people what it is to be Christian, we ask them a very comprehensive list of questions. You can look at the press release. It would be very hard for anyone to deny that many of these questions, most of these questions, are fundamental to the Christian religion.
But you're saying they're not Christians, even if they think of themselves as Christian. You know what they are, even though they tell you.
I'm not I'm not presenting my opinion here. This press release is offered to people to look down it and say, look, these people who call themselves Christians actually don't read the Bible, don't go to church, don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, don't even know what the first book of the New Testament is. But Richard, it's up to you to make up your mind whether you think they're Christian. Don't ask me. My opinion is not relevant.
Richard, if I said to you... And so the vicar just kept listening, and he said, Richard, you're a very erudite scientist. And Richard's just nodding, you know. He said, your favorite book is The Origin of Species, right, by Darwin? He said, right. He said, Richard, can you name the full title of the book? This happened live. And Dawkins said, oh, yeah, I know, it's a much longer title than The Origin of Species. So the vicar said, go ahead. Name it for me.
But if I said to you, what is the full title of The Origin of Species? I'm sure you could tell me that.
Yes, I could.
Go on then.
On The Origin of Species,
I'm quoting this to you now, please forgive me. This is the way it went. Richard Dawkins says, The Origin of Species on, oh my God.
On The Origin of Species, there is a subtitle with respect to the preservation of favoured races in the fight, in the struggle.
You're the high pope of Darwinism, and if you asked people who believed in evolution what that question, and then you came back and said 2% got it right, it would terribly easy for me to go, they don't really believe it after all. It's just not fair to ask people these questions.
The ultimate proof of the sovereignty and omnipotence of God is that it even takes an atheist who doesn't believe in him to call upon him to remind him of the title of the book that helped him deny him. And the next morning's newspaper said, and I quote, it's been a bad week for atheists. Richard Dawkins was asked the question very plainly what he thought about God. You've heard this. It is quoted in many books, and David Aikman in his book. Listen to this, it's a mouthful. What do I think about God? The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it. A petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak. A vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser. A misogynistic, homophobic racist. Infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. I guess he doesn't like God. Listen to it. He's jealous, petty, unjust, unforgiving, vindictive, bloodthirsty, misogynistic, homophobic, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Now, he's just finished telling us he's a fictional character. That's half of the point. The other half of the point is when you ask him what he thinks of humanity, he goes on to say that he believes basically in the goodness of humanity without God watching over. Now, I don't know if I'm confused or he is. If God doesn't exist and all these descriptions apply, who did these things? Person is deluded when they believe something contrary to all the evidence. Who is deluded? Who wrote the Old Testament if God didn't inspire the words? Humanity. That would be his answer. And who ordered all those things? Humanity. Why on earth are you so big on humanity and so small on God when humanity manufactured the God that you deny?